This is Delta Sierra Juliet. Is there any known traffic below 5,000?
Delta Sierra Juliet, no known traffic.
Seems to be a large aircraft below 5,000.
What type of aircraft is it?
It is more bright. Seems to me like landing lights. The aircraft has just passed over me at least 1,000 feet above. It seems to me that he's playing some sort of game. He's flying over me 2-3 times at speeds I could not identify. As it's flying past, it's a long shape. Cannot identify more that it has such speed. It seems like it's stationary. What I'm doing right now is orbiting, and the thing is just orbiting on top of me also. It's got a green light and sort of metallic-like. It's all shiny on the outside. The engine is rough idling. I've got it set at 23, 24, and the thing is coughing. Attention to go to King Island, Melbourne. That strange aircraft is hovering on top of me again. It is hovering, and it is not an aircraft.
What you've just heard was a recreation of the final words spoken by pilot Fred Valentich before his plane disappeared over Bass Strait. Even though it's been 19 years since Fred disappeared, the mystery surrounding what happened to him still hasn't faded. He just vanished without trace, and his family believed he was taken by an unidentified flying object. Recent years has been an explosion of UFO sightings in Australia. Whenever you mention the topic, people seem to have their own theories and opinions, or even their own stories.
It was orange like a sunset, and it was just spanning across the road.
I can't move it.
Moving forward in time through the experience.
Then this tall, dark being just appeared in front of the craft.
I mean, it looks like a traditional, every day of the week, comic book flying saucer.
They had large almond-shaped eyes, small bodies, legs and arms, and sort of grey in appearance.
I think it's the first time in my life that I could identify of anybody telling me that they were scared they were going to die.
Saying that this thing was only just down the bottom of his street. He could see that it was out in the water, it was sucking up water.
Yeah, I believe it's a UFO.
There are between 400 and 500 reports a month of UFOs in this country. Now, obviously, a lot of them can be explained, but about 10% prove to be true mysteries. Tonight you'll hear from people who've had these experiences. They're just normal Australians who can't explain what they saw.
I was travelling from Sydney in a northerly direction toward Gosford along this particular road here, the Pacific Highway, and it was quiet. There wasn't a lot of traffic. It was early Christmas morning, and I was just gazing out of the front window of the car, and I saw approximately half a kilometre away a bright silver metallic object crossing from south to north.
I stood here not believing my eyes, because where I sit I can see the open water, and I just couldn't believe that this thing could appear on the water. It was some kind of craft, but it was completely surrounded in lights underneath and all around, and it just looked like a carousel. It wasn't anything flat.
Around holiday time, the local police know they'll be busy. But on this New Year's Eve, the calls weren't what they expected.
All people that I spoke to had exactly the same thing to say. There was no variance whatsoever in the object that was sighted. It was a huge chrome, very shiny object in the shape of a ball. At the bottom of the ball was a number of huge white lights. This object looked like it was sucking up water. Some calls were quite frightful in their voice. You can actually hear the fear, and in the background especially, the fear of people and of course animals and things at the time that were experiencing this phenomena.
We're looking out above this headland here, and we're watching a bright light move in a strange fashion that you'll never see, or we never saw anyway. It was moving quickly and move, for instance, in a zigzag fashion. We were watching it for 10 to 15 minutes, move in this direction north, and we just saw this bright light, 15, 20 metres above our car. Just a bright light, emanating light towards our car. It was just awesome.
All of a sudden I saw these lights come out of the water like a cylinder and flash, and the top of the water was all lit up. And as that light was up, I could hear the rushing of water, movement of water, and then the water being raised up, and then shortly after, down comes the water on top of the lake.
I noticed this rather bright light that seemed to be on the right-hand side of the car, and it seemed to be following us for quite a while, and then all of a sudden it turned and went at a right angle right across the expressway in front of the car. It was large, round, and seemed to have a stream of sparks flying out the back of it. I don't know what it was, but it was most peculiar.
After the initial New Year's Eve reports to police, the local Sun weekly newspaper got hold of the story.
There were hundreds more people at home that had obviously thought they'd seen something quite out of the ordinary, but were too scared maybe to come forward and actually say that they'd seen something. Our office, the day the report hit the streets, was amazing. We had caller after caller saying they'd seen the same thing.
A lot of the witnesses were retired academics, some were policemen, nurses, school teachers, Sunday school teachers, lawyers, business people, some of the leading business people in the area. They were all people that had everything to lose and nothing to gain by even coming forward and making a report. All the people who actually saw it hovering over the water described these 4 or 5 shafts of bright white light coming down to the water and literally penetrating the water rather than reflecting off it. We also had descriptions of the water seething underneath it. Some people said it frothed, some people said it foamed, some people said it was steaming up.
Overall, I'd imagine there'd be probably 3 dozen telephone calls on the night.
Well, police, Sergeant. In particular, Sergeant Wenning remembers one very distressed caller.
He told me he had been woken up from a deep sleep with thunderous noise and bright lights, dogs barking. His children had come into his bedroom screaming. He was saying that this thing was only just down the bottom of his street. He could see it. It was out in the water. It was sucking up water. The sound was like a million hummingbees. He didn't know what was going on.
We investigated officially with the local aircraft, aerodromes, with the Air Force, with air traffic control, and again could come up with no explanation.
While everyone can describe what they saw, no one seems to have the answer to exactly what it was or where it came from.
It was moving in waves in the sky, which could only be described as a UFO.
When you see something like this, there's a sure knowledge that you're looking at something that is beyond your experience.
I'm not young, and people might think, oh, you're a bit strange, seeing things and had imagination. No, I've got imagination, but not like that. Not when I see something that I see. I know I saw it.
At first I thought, well, maybe it's some type of meteorite, but it was too large, it was travelling too slow, and turned a right angle, which I know meteorites aren't inclined to do.
I was just bewildered at how something could appear and disappear in the thin air practically.
Well, I honestly don't know what they saw. We've gone right through all the realm of possible explanations, which leaves it as what a UFO truly is, a flying object which we cannot identify by conventional means.
There's a saying that seeing is believing, and it certainly applies to UFOs. The most intriguing personal accounts come from people with no real interest or belief, until it happens to them.
Before this happened to me, I can be honest, I could say that I was in that category of being naive. I didn't believe it. I didn't really believe it, because I had to see, it's like I would have to see it with my own eyes.
Grace's experience starts in the early hours of the morning travelling home with 3 girlfriends. Victoria, who can't be identified, was one of the women in the back seat.
It's when I got a bit further down the hill that I noticed on the right-hand side of me some long oblong-shaped lights. I didn't know what they were. I mean, I only sort of caught a glimpse of a bright orange light sort of shining through. As I got down the hillside and started to come around the corner by this little hotel that takes us back through the back roads towards the freeway, one of the girls in the back noticed a very bright white light with a type of blue haze around it. When the girls were sort of saying, oh, maybe, you know, like it's a UFO, and, you know, was sort of like just laughed it off and said, don't be so ridiculous.
The women continued their trip, but further down the road, more lights appeared.
I heard Victoria and one of the other girls in the back there, they were commenting on something that was behind us. They actually thought somebody was coming up behind us, like a truck or something, because it was moving fairly fast and very bright. It was just such a bright as blinding light. It was orange like a sunset, and it was just spanning across the road.
I got really scared, and I said to Grace, quick, just step on it. Because I knew there was a town just a kilometre up the road.
So as we got closer into the middle of this car parking area and looked up, we could see this ship. Well, that's what you'd have to call it, because it was, you know, definitely not an aeroplane, and it was something from definitely not this world, that's for sure.
It sort of moved across from this direction straight over the top of us. Sort of disappeared into a gully where we lost sight of it.
We were scared for our safety. I mean, I've got to be honest, I think it's the first time in my life that I could identify of anybody telling me that they were scared they were going to die. Because I was. When I got to the opening of the drive here, the other girls noticed that there was something else up, some activity up there in the sky. We were still scared. We didn't know what they were either. They seemed to be moving in a direction that this other craft had gone over and gone down.
So the first thing you think of, just pull someone's driveway.
And as I pulled in, the light was so blinding, it actually was hurting our eyes to look at it. Then I noticed a figure coming. It wasn't a human, it definitely was no human, that's for sure. I felt threatened by it. I felt really, really threatened by it. That was the closest thing I've ever experienced, the thought of actually, you know, coming close to death, I suppose, which sounds pretty silly, but the fear I had was like that, like I wasn't going to see my family again. And the weird thing is that it's not the normal thing to talk about and for people to accept. But, you know, it's been 3 years now, and I still feel very distressed by it.
In the weeks, I felt a lot of doubt with what happened to Grace. I didn't believe it, truly believed it, because I hadn't experienced anything like that myself. So I didn't show it either. I mean, I didn't show that I didn't believe it, because I think it was important that I looked like I was supporting her, so that otherwise, you know, she might go sort of, you know, off the rails if she didn't feel she had some support from her husband.
But 2 weeks later, those doubts disappeared.
What's work?
Late one night, they were both woken by their distressed 15-year-old son.
He was dead set that he had presence in his room. You know, there was somebody in his room. And one thing that he kept saying at that time was that, can you hear that sound? And he kept pointing up to the ceiling. And we could hear this low drone sound. I knew then I'd heard that sound before. We got back into bed and I was laying there. And I thought, do I lie here and just let this thing go through and just, you know, try and wipe it off as another bad experience, or do I actually get up and look, and if it is what I think it is, then maybe my husband will be able to see for the first time and he will believe.
I just couldn't believe what I was seeing. When you see an object that's just sort of floating through the air, like at slow pace, and you think to yourself, oh my God, it struck me as, you know, being awesome. It's just something unbelievable.
It was a relief that he was able to see this thing, and all I kept saying was that was the thing that was there the night when I was with the others.
Certainly by its nature, by the way, characteristics of the way it just hovered across the house at a slow pace, yeah, no, nothing man-made. Not from this country, not from this earth, I should say.
Even though Grace and her husband ended up experiencing the same craft, their ways of coping with it differ.
You either accept it or you don't accept it, and I tend to say now, after I've seen it with my own eyes, I accept it, but I don't, you know, harp on about it and talk about it, and if it's just one of those things you try and leave as a part of your life that's happened, and let's get on with things, let's move on from here, you see. And that's how I sort of try and treat it, rather than try and find an explanation as to what it is.
Yeah, I really don't have a theory yet. It's basically, it's more the fear. Again, I don't know why, because I'm still here and I am healthy, you know, I mean, but the fact is it's just a worry because you don't know. You just don't know.
What do you reckon it is?
Got no idea.
Images of UFOs caught on video over the years tend to raise more questions than they answer.
Ron, they are visitors. Yeah? Yes, yes. UFO.
Working out whether there is something out there has intrigued researchers for years.
And there's no doubt that there is a physical dimension to this UFO phenomenon, and it appears to involve some form of technology, and many cases certainly suggest that we're dealing with an exotic technology that might be something certainly foreign to our environment.
When a Melbourne photographer saw images like these, he was interested enough to go on standby to try and capture on film whatever was buzzing the sky over Narre Warren in June 1996.
I got the phone call and I was told that the lights were spinning across the tree line over the homes. What I did was put the camera onto the object, allowing it just to come into frame, hit the shutter, count to 20, stop, wind, move the camera to the next part of the frame, start the shot, count to 20, let it go, and so forth. The first night, the result of the photographs showed just light trails of this object going across over the tree line. The second night, with higher speed film and the higher magnification lens, is where we actually captured the shot of the disc. This thing was, the only way to explain it was moving across the air like ice on a hot plate, very, very smooth.
Later in the program, Doug's photos will be studied by an independent expert.
Well, it was flying, it's unidentified, and it was definitely an object. What it will be, and I hope with the analysis will prove me right. But yeah, I believe it's a UFO.
In the UFO community, the term hypnotherapy is like a buzzword. It's the thing to try if you feel you have secrets of the past to unlock. While mainstream medicine doesn't necessarily recognise it, people who've had UFO encounters believe it helps.
Victor Pufulescu believes he started having alien encounters as a teenager back in his native Romania. He's turned to hypnotherapy to try and find out exactly what happened.
It's like being a good soldier. You just obey orders. This is actually probably the best description of hypnosis process.
Loosen limb, deeper sleep. Loosen limb, heavier and heavier. Not a worry, not a care. Deeper, deeper, and deeper. Hypnotherapy is a way of allowing us to get into the subconscious mind. The intellectual mind tends to want to control and criticise everything. It's the censor of stuff it doesn't even know about that was in there before we were 3 years old. So by sort of relaxing and sliding across the conscious mind, if you like, we can sort of delve into the unconscious, or to allow what's in the unconscious to find its way out.
Oh, I can't move, Frank.
Uh-huh.
The pressure is increasing. I can't move. The chest, my arms, my legs.
There's a thing about hypnotherapy that very often the subject will want to please the hypnotist. So you have to look at that. But the thing is that you can see that when a person is reliving an experience, that it's pretty easy to see whether that's faked or not. Moving forward in time.
My legs.
Moving forward
my
in
feet.
time. Moving forward in time through the experience.
The pain is inside of my elbow. Thanks.
Who are you saying thanks to?
Them.
Can you ask them what they're doing?
No. It's a test.
That's a test.
I just know it's a test. They keep me telling be calm.
They're telling you to be calm.
Yeah.
Very often the people are quite disturbed about dreams they're having or things they've imagined happen to them. And they often come out of this saying, I'm pleased I'm not crazy, or I'm not mad, or I'm not imagining this.
It does give you some answers, but also creates thousands more. And this is probably the trickiest part. I'm never happy with the answer which I'm getting, and I want more and more and more.
Just relaxing as much as you can with every breath. Just feeling a sense of calm. From 1992, there was a very strong correlation with awakening psychically and with my healing work to having these experiences.
Elizabeth Robinson is a spiritual healer and therapist who says she's been having extraterrestrial experiences since childhood, but is only now starting to accept them.
I mean, when they started with me, I thought, my God, this is bizarre. You know, this is crazy. This is in the realm of science fiction. But I know now I've had to work through that and struggle with it, and I've denied it like hell for 5 years. And I can't deny it anymore.
Elizabeth says she started seeing creatures like these around her home in Perth in 1992.
There were 3 beings standing there. They had large shaped heads, bigger at the top to chin at the bottom, large almond-shaped eyes, small bodies, legs and arms, and sort of grey in appearance. But they looked at me with a sense of intent and intelligence.
Soon after, Elizabeth's daughter talked of being visited by a lady during the night. Elizabeth believes it was one of the same beings.
And I looked down on the desk, and here was a drawing of this being, this same being that I had seen. And I said to Jessica, who did that? Because I knew that at 2.5, her drawings were scribble drawings. And she said, oh, that's the lady. I tried to rationalise it, but I knew that I wasn't imagining this stuff. You know, there was something in me that told me that there was more to these experiences.
They're looking at me again.
Elizabeth then turned to hypnotherapy to try and uncover what she couldn't understand. This session was recorded last year with visiting American UFO researcher John Carpenter.
I don't want to give the baby up.
What seems to have come up in hypnosis is that I've had children taken from me, babies taken from me that are growing up on crafts. And this is just absolutely bizarre, you know, talking about this. I mean, you talk about this, but, you know, at first you struggle with it. I mean, you can't fully comprehend this, but what I could comprehend was the emotion around it.
I know what they're doing. They say it's time. they tell me with their mind.
The emotions are so real, they're raw, they're, you know, the grief is there, the terror is something like I've never felt before.
They're just doing what they're doing.
What are they doing?
They're getting the equipment ready.
Part of the reason why they're involved here on Earth is to help us awaken, but there seems to be some sort of reciprocal type of arrangement whereby, you know, they're coming to Earth and they're creating a new race of beings, or creating some sort of hybrid race of beings.
I used to think, okay, I'm dreaming, until I used to be able to get up, go to the bathroom, make a cup of tea, come back, sit down, they'd still be waiting for me. Yeah. And I think, oh.
Elizabeth and colleague Mary Rodwell now run a support group in Perth for people who've had alien experiences.
And this is what I mean, my business is emotional trauma. That's why I'm here. And I won't deal with fantasy. I can't deal with fantasy. So it's about emotional trauma. These people are stressed quite desperately with fear and anxiety about a lot of things that they only have a vague idea often about, but often is because they've remembered being taken.
I went 3 months with barely any sleep. If you remember, I told you about 11 or 12 weeks, barely any sleep.
Most of them just want to live an ordinary life. They don't want this to happen. So for them to have the chance to at least talk about it and release all the anxiety and fear around that as much as they can around talking about it, it seems that through that there is real healing.
For me, I became very frightened that I would be labelled crazy or, you know, hallucinating, whatever it was, and that I couldn't have somebody to relate this experience to that would honour my experience. Have either
Elizabeth has always kept journals about her experiences, which she is now using to write a book.
I saw a grey being appear, white-grey colour. In the dream, I was searching for my son, even though the child dream of trying to run away from several grey beings, but as fast as I ran or wherever I really don't expect someone to be able to say, absolutely, you know, this is real, because, you know, you always doubt yourself, but you know that it's real, and you have to come to some point and stop denying it, and that's what I'm starting to do.
Sorting out the facts surrounding UFOs can be tough, unless of course there's something that science can put to the test.
Earlier in the program we saw photographs taken by Doug Page. The time exposures show what Doug believes is a UFO hovering near his home in 1996.
Now, has this been observed by other people as well?
Practically all of Narre Warren.
Okay, so that was seen, but not as a streak, because this is a time exposure. So it was simply an object of some sort traveling.
Correct.
In somewhat of a line, but as you can see, it goes up and down here. This type of negative sleeve will take...
The professor would like to examine the negatives that come before and after the pictures in question.
Explain to me why...
But Doug has used the ends of rolls of film and discarded the shots he felt didn't work.
Now, when the films were actually ready for handling, I'd lay them out and I went through them, and I go with the scissors and I just go cut, cut, into the bin, cut, cut, put it there, and that's what I did.
Okay.
After examining the camera the shots were taken with and checking density readings on the negatives, the next step is to enhance the images on the computer.
I don't rely on computers for analysis. They're a bit of a tool. They sometimes let us see things a little bit better, but to actually definitively say that a particular thing is something, I stay away from that.
That's right.
How did you focus the camera?
Just on infinity.
Okay, so if you focused on infinity, technically the tower should be sharper in focus than the tree.
Should be, shouldn't it?
Mm-hmm.
But it's not.
Interesting question, isn't it?
It's a good one. The only trouble is there's no sort of guarantee, of course, in the darkness that it hasn't moved off set either, but I had that set for infinity.
Okay.
With some of the technical questions out of the way, it becomes an issue of individual perception.
Very specific things here. I see a disc-shaped object. I see something with a rim. Okay, there is definitely a lip. There are what appears to be lights. There's big, there's another small one in between, another one. So we've got something that is geometrically laid out. You can see a texture, and you can see definitely on the dark side of it something. So something's in shadow. I mean, it looks like a traditional, every day of the week, comic book flying saucer.
My first impression of this when I saw it, again, was a trumpet, a circular object here that we have a bell shape that comes out like so. This is unexplained optical either artifact, phenomena,
or reality,
or could be, could be an object, but it is totally undefinable.
And of technical concern is the fact that the start of the time exposure is more in focus than the end shape.
Does it make any sense to you that if this was moving and it's decelerating, would that have a bearing on the shape of the line? If it was slowing? Because
no, it shouldn't. It should be exactly the same sharpness.
Despite question marks over issues like that, the professor is able to reach some conclusions.
I don't believe that it's been faked. I think it is probably something that was traveling through the air. What it would be, I wouldn't know, and there's no indication from the photographs that would give me any clue.
There are points there that I haven't considered, such as the object, could well be a phenomenon that that I've never heard of. So I mean, we've got to keep an open mind.
I don't know, maybe between 6 and 8, I would assume.
Okay. They were fairly intense, or?
Yeah, they were very close together as well.
Right, okay.
4 years ago, Kelly Carr was a mother and housewife with no interest in spaceships or aliens. Now she's using technology to reconstruct images of her own encounter.
It does give the idea of the lights there, but the brightness of the light, it gives a good impression, except that the colour doesn't seem right.
Kelly's account starts in August 1993.
My husband and I were driving up to my girlfriend's place in Monbulk, which is in the Dandenong Mountains. We were driving on Belgrave-Hallam Road, and it was just on dusk. I saw what I thought was round orange lights in the field. It looked unusual to me.
Later that night, retracing their route home, Kelly noticed something else unusual.
It's about a kilometre or so in front of us, about twice the height of the treetops. We could see this object, which at first I thought was a blimp. It had the shape of a blimp, but it was light. As we got closer to it, the light seemed to sort of separate, and it was actually these a row of round lights, and they were orange. It appeared like there was silhouettes standing in these round orange circles, like people, but you could only see the black outline. Well, I just said to my husband, look, there's people in there. And the minute I said that, it shot off to the left of us. Within 1 or 2 seconds, it was gone completely. About a kilometre or two further down the road, as we kept driving, I came across at least what I thought was a screen or a wall of light across the road. And my heart started racing and the adrenaline was sort of pumping through my body, and I'm thinking, we've just seen this back down there, we're in for, a close encounter. Then the next instant, nothing. We seem to have actually covered a fair distance that I don't even remember covering. It might have been possibly close to a kilometre that I don't remember actually travelling. There was no light. There was nothing blocking the road.
Kelly says it wasn't until weeks later she remembered actually getting out of the car that night.
And I saw that there was another car that had pulled up 100 metres down the road. Then I walked around the front of the car to where my husband was standing on the other side, and we started walking across the road together. As we were walking across the road, I looked down and I saw that the other people were getting out the car and starting to walk as well. So I was quite happy that there was other people there who were seeing the same thing that we were. And we walked up along here to where the fence is. Right out in front of us is this huge craft. I was totally awestruck, it was science fiction coming to life. There wasn't any fear then, it was just all total awe. We stood here, I guess side by side, my husband and I, for about 30 to 45 seconds. Then this tall, dark being just appeared in front of the craft, and he was followed by about another 7 or 8 that appeared straight behind him. I felt this energy go through me. It's like nothing I've ever experienced before in my life. It was like some sort of low-level frequency that came in waves, but it was so dense that I could actually physically feel it going through my body. And that feeling absolutely terrified me. It was like, I can't even explain the horror that I felt just feeling this. And I began screaming. The minute I did, the eyes on these things lit up and they came charging across the field. Halfway across, they split up into 2 groups. Some headed off down there and the rest came directly towards us. I felt this blow to my stomach, and the next thing you know, I'm back here somewhere on the grass. It literally lifted me off of my feet. And I thought I was going to die. I thought if I don't get up now, I'm going to pass out and I'm going to die. I'm not going to come back to consciousness, you know. So I pulled myself up into a sitting position, and when I sat up, I couldn't see anything, and it was like there was just black in front of my eyes. I want you to try stretching it down a little bit as well.
Kelly is not the only one who saw these images that night. For the first time ever, independent witnesses have given the same account of a close encounter. Even though Kelly has never met Jane, Glenda and Bill from the other car she saw, she has seen the sketches they drew for UFO researchers.
They've drawn the same circles of light around the top of the craft with these blue lines coming down, ending in a semicircle on the ground. They've actually also drawn a tripod underneath, which was something I didn't see that night. It becomes very clear then that we were all looking at the same thing and that it wasn't your average saucer-shaped craft. And basically, the second party were able to draw sketches of the beings very similar to the ones that I had, and they're not your usual little grey things that are, you know, media propaganda. I found a small red-coloured equilateral triangle underneath my navel, which I guess in reality provoked only a minor curiosity at the time. It was oddly geometric, and I did wonder, you know, how something like that could get on me that looked like a burn without me feeling it.
At UFO conferences, where Kelly is now a keynote speaker, she adds strength to her own story by showing photographs of physical marks left on one of the other women.
We were all left with triangular marks under our navels, but the ones that were marks that were actually photographed, the first one came from Glenda, which is it's a series of 3 small red dots along the inner thigh, and both Jane and Glenda were marked with these dots. I wasn't. Glenda had a ligature mark around her ankle, which is quite severe bruising. It looked like she'd been strapped down to something.
UFO researchers have also reported finding physical traces of the site where all witnesses said the encounter happened, particularly in relation to where the craft landed.
Inside that semicircle was actually a triangular formation of 3 points spaced 6 metres apart, which correspond with the tripod that was drawn underneath the girl's craft.
To this day, Kelly still doesn't know exactly what happened to her that night.
Tried a little bit.
Her most vivid memory is the fear that she felt.
That's very good. It's finally come out to what I'm looking for. And I think a lot of people, you know, might have experienced the fear in a nightmare when you're being chased or something like that, and it's a terror that you feel that, you know, sometimes can wake you up or whatever, but it's absolutely horrifying when you're dreaming it. And that's exactly what I was feeling while I was totally awake. That sort of terror, actually having to feel it while you're conscious and physically awake and feel it as a reality, is like a living nightmare, like a nightmare had come to life.
We've moved out onto 138 acres. We don't have electricity. We use all our own fuel, like for both our fires. We're in the process of trying to become self-sufficient as far as food's concerned. We just lead just a very different lifestyle.
Denise Borrett says it's her encounters with strange beings that have helped her make the decision to live this way.
There's one of our missing. I believe at the moment that they're giving us quite a dire warning about what's happening to the planet and what's going to happen to us unless we actually wake up to what we're actually doing. They seem to open parts of your mind that aren't open before, and or they help you to do that. I don't know, but all I know is that I'm a very changed person since I've had my experience.
Well, lifestyle changes you'd think shouldn't happen to people if these things aren't physically occurring. So I guess it's a little piece of evidence to suggest that something really startling and extraordinary must have happened to a person because of the changes that they do go through.
Denise says her visitors have the ability to render her husband unconscious, so he never actually experiences the aliens, but he does have physical scars.
Well, I know I've got a lot of scars on my body, and I know basically where they all came from, but this one, in that particular place, I've got no idea. I just woke up one morning and I happened to comment to Denise, I've got this funny little mark on my arm, and she had a look and she had one in exactly the same place because she said she could remember it happening.
And I can actually remember them cutting it. I can remember it was like a little spatula or whatever. But again, there was no pain or anything, and the next day mine had completely healed up, whereas Les's had actually scarred.
And I thought, well, they're in identical spots and they're identical size, so obviously something was going on.
People who've had multiple abduction experiences very often get very concerned about the environment. They get very concerned about healthy lifestyles. They get very interested in the possibility of life elsewhere.
It was eerily silent. That really does stick in my mind, that was really eerily silent. And for some reason, I don't know why, I picked my clipboard up and started to draw it. I made a quick sketch. So it's there. Rather than my head, it's there, it's black and white.
Although he'd made a sketch, Alan Godfrey's story would ultimately centre around what happened next.
Now it's black and white. And I'm at the other side of it, driving. Quick glance at mirror, it's not there. I got out of the car. The road surface was whirlpool dry, like a spinning object would make, you know, with all these leaves and branches and what have you. You could see an area of road surface that wasn't like the other. The others were wet, this was dry.
Unsure of what had happened to him, PC Godfrey drove straight back to the police station in Todmorden.
When Alan came into the police station, he was very agitated.
I says to him, you'll never guess what I've just seen, you know. You won't believe what I've just seen.
At first, you know, you think it's totally outrageous, you know, but I've no reason to doubt him. I mean, I've known him for a long time and we know each other really well, and I've no reason to doubt what he said.
But the night still had one more surprise left. As Alan Godfrey ended his shift, he noticed something else he couldn't explain.
There was approximately 30-35 minutes missing that couldn't be accounted for. For me leaving the police station to coming back. To me, I'd only been away 15 minutes. Over I had, I'd been away approximately 45-50 minutes.
What Alan Godfrey claimed to have experienced was strange enough, but he wasn't alone in witnessing unusual phenomena that night. On the night of the 28th of November 1980, Police Constable Alan Godfrey was driving through the Pennine town of Todmorden when he witnessed a strange object in the road.
It was something you only read about or seen on television. And suddenly, it's there in front of you. It was just something out of a science fiction film. It was totally unbelievable.
PC Godfrey had no rational explanation for what he'd seen, or for what he discovered later.
I had this irritating itch on my foot. The boot on my left foot was split. If that's the sole of the, it was split that way. I've no idea why they were split, but when I took it off, I removed my sock, and it was on the instep of my foot, and it was a round circle like that, red. And it was very, very itchy. It wasn't sore, but it was very, very itchy.
At work the following day, Alan Godfrey received some surprising news. He hadn't been the only officer who claimed to have seen something strange the previous night.
I came on duty, and there was an inspector waiting to see me. I went into the inspector's office, and he then informed me that I wasn't alone, that 3 police officers in Halifax, in fact, had some sort of an encounter the same night. And he was putting a report together, and he wanted a statement off me. Coming out the inspector's office thinking, yeah, right on.
12 miles from Todmorden, on the moors above Halifax, PC's John Porter, Howard Turnpenny and Julie Baxter had been looking for stolen motorbikes. What they witnessed compelled them to make an official report.
We parked up, got out, walked down over the fields towards the quarries, and we'd nearly reached the quarries, and then something, nothing verbally, but something told us to turn. And we turned and just stood. And in the sky was a very cold, and I would describe it as a cold steel blue light. Not flashing, but pulsating. And the hairs on my arms and my neck just stood up. I cannot tell you, in all honesty, how big this thing was, because there was no definite shape to it other than a pulsating steel blue ball. But wherever it went, it was very, very fast. As fast as I'm moving my hand now. A second, a second, a second, a second. And that's how fast it moved, with no noise.
Whiskey Delta 40 to Halifax Control.
Tried to speak to Halifax on the radio. Nothing. Absolutely dead. I wasn't frightened, I was intrigued as to what this was.
But for WPC Julie Baxter, the experience proved unsettling.
Julie was scared. There's no doubt about it. She made her feelings very plain. Scared. Howard was like me. He wanted to know what it was. He wanted to see this thing. And for no known reason, it shot off in a big overhead arc towards Todmorden. Whatever it was not of... I can't explain whatever of our making. It was something completely alien to my understanding.
And the night was getting even stranger. 2 traffic officers on the moors near Littleborough, 12 miles from both Alan Godfrey and the Halifax patrol, reported seeing a bright pulsating sphere hovering between 2 electricity pylons before it sped off over the hills. In all, 6 separate police officers had witnessed strange phenomena that night. But it was Alan Godfrey's story which caught the attention of both the local press and UFO investigators, many of whom descended on Todmorden in the wake of the sighting. In 1980, Jenny Randalls headed British UFO investigation group Bufora. She was born near Todmorden and has written about British UFO sightings for over 35 years.
The Alan Godfrey experience, when it happened, came at the culmination of a whole series of events during the preceding 3 or 4 months that had been occurring in and around that area. They've been getting stranger and stranger.
The Pennines are the backbone of the United Kingdom. The area stretches from the Scottish borders to the Derbyshire Peaks, a distance of 250 miles. Throughout the 1970s, there have been dozens of reports of objects in the sky over Yorkshire and Lancashire. So numerous were the sightings, the area earned itself the name UFO Alley. John Sheard was a Yorkshire-based journalist reporting for both the local and national press.
This was a time when the whole nation was obsessed with UFO stories. We had reports almost every day up here, particularly in the Pennines, but also throughout the country and, in fact, throughout the world.
The late 1970s and early 80s were the heyday of UFO mania. The release of films like Star Wars and Close Encounters coincided with the doubling of reports of UFO sightings in Britain. For the time being, news of Alan Godfrey's close encounter had stayed within Todmorden, but it hadn't escaped the attentions of a group of UFO investigators led by Jenny Randalls.
When I first met Alan, he struck me immediately as being a very typical, no-nonsense Yorkshire bobby. He would not have reported something like this unless he was absolutely sure in his own mind that it was real.
Although there was little physical evidence to support his claims, Alan Godfrey did have a damaged boot.
There was a split across the bottom of his boot. There's no question at all that that happened because we were able to immediately photograph it and it was real.
There was also the sketch made at the time of the sighting.
You just have to try and make a value judgment when you put all the evidence together, what you believe about the credibility of the witness, what the sincerity of the witness's story is, how it holds together again and again over the years.
But for Andy Roberts, who has researched hundreds of British UFO sightings, the origin of what PC Godfrey witnessed is relatively straightforward.
My personal belief is that he went into some form of altered state of consciousness, whether you call it a trance or something like that. Something triggered that. In his narratives, when he's described what he saw, he always says when he was driving up to it, he thought it was a bus. Now, it's possible that was the point when he slipped into this altered state of consciousness. When he got near it, he was seeing it as a UFO. Interestingly, he describes it as having 2 rows of windows, quite like a bus, actually. And it was on a main road near a bus stop. So it's possible he saw a bus delivering mill workers or picking mill workers up, and in his altered state of consciousness, it had transformed into a UFO.
This object I saw was hovering off the ground, had no wheels. It was of a metallic colour, and it had black panelling and dark windows. And it certainly wasn't a bus. I know the difference between a bus and what I saw that night.
And what of the strange lights witnessed by police officers John Porter, Julie Baxter and Howard Turnpenny just minutes before Alan Godfrey's encounter? Could they have a perfectly rational, scientific explanation? Dr. Ian Griffin worked for NASA on the Hubble telescope project for a decade before returning to the UK to carry out research into the movement of asteroids. He now watches the night skies from his home observatory in Todmorden.
My view is that nearly every UFO that has ever been seen has some kind of explanation. And it's probably because people don't really understand what they're looking at that they just call it a UFO. The planet Venus is often mistaken for a UFO. This is because it's very bright and it's very close to the sun in the sky. So very often, if you don't know what you're looking at and you see this stonkingly bright light beaming towards you, you think, what on earth is that? Meteors are sometimes mistaken for UFOs as well, caused by a very fast-moving rock entering the Earth's atmosphere high up. As the rock moves through the atmosphere, it ionises it and causes the gas atoms to glow in different colours. The colours can be green, they can be blue, and sometimes they can even be an orangey red colour.
There are other phenomena which may have existed for as long as the Pennines themselves, and which stem from more natural causes. Could these be the reason for the many sightings in the area, including those of Alan Godfrey and the other police officers in 1980? Dr. David Clark undertook a major study of the area, known as Project Pennine. It described naturally occurring phenomena that ranged from glowing hillsides to bizarre balls of light.
It's known that lights have been seen and reported by people following major earthquakes and earth tremors around the world. So we were interested in checking out whether similar correlations could be made with the lights that had been seen on a regular basis in the Pennines of northern England. Basically, you've got underground huge rock movements going on and rocks crushing against each other and electrons escaping from that movement. People have described seeing these light forms as following valleys or appearing above electricity pylons or even apparently pacing cars. But what may be happening here is that these lights are actually following fault lines or magnetic variations in the local area, and that those movements are interpreted by people who see them as being intelligent, as if it's a piloted craft of some description.
In November 1980, PC John Porter and his fellow officers had reported seeing a bright object moving at incredibly high speed. Could it have been a naturally occurring light or something man-made?
Aircraft can actually cause UFO sightings too. Oftentimes they'll have lights that flash under the wings, and viewed from certain angles they can appear to be coming straight towards you or whizzing across the sky relatively quickly. So it's not unknown for an aircraft to cause a UFO sighting.
We've all seen aircraft in the sky at night. I've been on nights many years as a police officer. I've seen all sorts moving in the sky. But on this occasion, whatever it was not an aircraft. It was not. There's no way it was an aircraft. Moving too fast and no noise.
Air traffic records, both civilian and military, revealed that there were no flights in the area at the time. Routinely, official police reports of UFO sightings would be passed to the Ministry of Defence. As part of the Freedom of Information Act, they've now been released. Dr. David Clark has been researching official reports into UFO sightings for over 20 years.
When the Ministry of Defence files on UFOs from 1980 were opened, I went to the National Archives and immediately went looking for any mention of the sightings in Todmorden in 1980. And straight away I found a copy of the report by the police officers from Halifax, PC John Porter and his colleagues, who'd seen a bright blue ball of light in the sky. But there was absolutely no trace of the report that was made by Alan Godfrey the same night, about 30 minutes later. Maybe they just thought that his sighting was a bit too weird and a bit too disturbing, to pass it on to the ministry.
But Alan Godfrey and John Porter were not the first police officers to have made an official report of a UFO sighting. Over the last 3 decades, police officers have contributed to a large proportion of British UFO reports. Gary Heseltine runs a database of UFO sightings made by both serving and retired police officers.
It's my belief that police officer testimony is of a very high calibre. There is no reason to think that these officers are mistaken because of their training, and I believe that police officer testimony should be regarded very highly in the world of the way we treat UFOs.
Police officers do see quite a lot of UFOs, and that's because they spend an awful lot of time out at night, often by themselves, often in remote areas like up on moors, industrial estates, places where there are not much ground light. You can see things in the sky. So anything that's up there, explicable or inexplicable, will be seen by police officers.
Between 1970 and 2000 alone, there were more than 700 UFO sightings made by serving police officers.
Clearly, police officers aren't going to make an official report about something they've seen in the sky in a frivolous way. It's not something that they would do lightly, because it has all kinds of impacts upon their career and whether they're taken seriously or not.
15th of August 1975, 2 uniformed police officers observed a bright lighted UFO heading in the direction of Hayward. A uniformed officer saw a huge UFO. 2 on-duty uniformed police officers, including a Chief Superintendent Hobson, were en route. 2:15 hours, Crofton, Wakefield, West Yorkshire. PC Patrick Tunney was checking on a couple of shops during the early hours of a winter's morning when he suddenly noticed 3 green lights approaching from around a mile distant.
Wakefield lies on the very edge of the Pennines, 30 miles from Todmorden. At the time of his sighting in 1976, PC Patrick Tunney was a well-respected police officer with over 20 years' experience.
I thought at first it was an helicopter having trouble, and we were looking at it. I thought, there's no noise, no engine noise, nothing. Just these 3 lights drifting towards me at about, say, between 100 and 150 feet high. The next minute, it didn't slow down, it didn't increase, and suddenly it turned to its left, and then it accelerated at a speed I've never seen it go that fast in my life. All it was a streak of light, and that was it, gone.
Could what PC Tunney saw have been an aircraft, meteor, or even a naturally occurring ball of light? And could any of these account for what Alan Godfrey claimed to have experienced in November 1980? Whatever the explanation, within a few months, Alan Godfrey's story would take a much more bizarre turn. After police officer Alan Godfrey reported an encounter with a strange object in West Yorkshire in 1980, some researchers claimed it to be a landmark in British UFO history.
After Alan Godfrey's experience had happened, we were immediately aware that this had cemented the importance of the Pennine area as the hotspot for UFO activity in Britain, and in fact probably the most active location for UFO encounters anywhere in Europe.
18 months before Alan Godfrey's sighting, mysterious bright orange lights had been reported speeding across the night skies of Lancashire. At 2 a.m. on the morning of February the 24th, 1979, Mike Sachs was at home in the village of Stacksteads, getting ready for bed.
All of a sudden, the room lit. The light was moving. I rushed to the window to be confronted with this huge ovoid, about 8-10 foot across, light, all diffused around the edges. It was pulsing, brilliant to intense, very orangey white. There was no sound. I remember that distinctly. We were in awe at this. We couldn't believe what we were seeing. It slowly descended out of sight into the quarry. It went through my mind, they do exist. These things do exist.
And Mike Sachs wasn't the only witness to the mysterious object. Local farmer Alf Kime, then 19, was out working with another farmhand when he too saw something strange in the sky.
We thought we were a shooting star flying down, and this building blocked it, so we shot past the building to see it. Like amazing really, because it was the size of 2 double-decker buses, and it was sort of like spinning round, like changing colours, a lot of orange, and it went right across the skyline, right over the valley, then right over the valley, and it went over, over top of houses, right over to quarry. And I thought, somebody must see that, even though it were late, I thought somebody must see it, we can't be the only ones to see this.
I immediately phoned Baker Police, reported what I'd seen, and they said, right. He said, well, 2 of our police officers have also phoned in. They were parked just below the quarry, and they reported it. I phoned my brother Raymond. I went up for him. We came back to the quarry, where the Panda car was still parked there. And I said, did you see it? And he said, see it? We thought it were coming down on our blooming heads.
There you go.
So we decided then to go up to the quarry. Now the police officers went up with us. But there was nothing to be seen.
By 3 a.m, Alf Kime had arrived home.
When we got back that night, my dad said, is everything all right? The cow's all right? And I said, yeah, everything's perfect. I said, but we've seen a flying saucer or something to that description. And he said, don't be somebody daft. What have you been smoking? And obviously we're laughing to himself. And he said, have you been drinking? And Mike shouted out, no, he said, we've actually seen it. We've seen some of it anyway. He said, all right, I'll see you tomorrow then.
That night, between 2:30 and 2:50 a.m, there were a dozen separate sightings reported throughout Lancashire and as far west as Merseyside. The reports varied from fiercely bright orange orbs to the oval-shaped craft seen by Mike Sachs and Alf Kime.
The following week, when it's out in local free press, you didn't feel as daft then, really, telling, you know, because we told this story and you could see people didn't believe you when you were telling it, because, you know, I don't think I'd believe it myself, really.
If the oval-shaped craft seemed inexplicable, what were the bright orange lights seen shooting across the sky that night? Astronomer Dr. Ian Griffin may have one explanation.
Since the dawn of the space age, several thousand objects have been launched into space. And the re-entry of a satellite can cause a bright flash of light in the sky. And certainly big satellites, for example Skylab in the late 1970s, or the Mir station in the 1990s, when they entered the Earth's atmosphere, they looked like tremendous fireballs with bits breaking off. So oftentimes, yes, space junk can cause UFO sightings.
For many skeptics, the explanation for the sightings is even more straightforward. The Pennines has two busy civilian airports situated at its edge.
There was a huge explosion of air travel in the 70s and 80s, and that led to the expansion of Manchester Airport, of Leeds Bradford Airport, and international aeroplanes. Now, the Pennines, quite wild, it's very dark at night, and if you see an aircraft in the sky through unusual weather conditions or coming into land or taking off, its beams, its light configuration can appear very, very strange. And I think that's largely been the result of why there have been so many UFO sightings over the Pennines from the 1970s onwards.
When it comes to UFO sightings over the Pennines, or anywhere else for that matter, we can readily explain away 99% more as mistaken identity. But it leaves that niggling little number every time that no matter how much research, no matter how much you try, you can't get rid of these particular cases. And after a lot of legwork, they still remain unexplained.
There was another possible explanation, that the lights in the sky being witnessed that night were connected with some secret Cold War military operation. After some of his constituents had reported seeing the lights, the MP for Ormskirk even raised the question in Parliament. On the 12th of June 1979, the Ministry of Defence issued a statement. It said that a US Air Force exercise had taken place between the 21st and 24th of February, during which fighter aircraft had been flying at very low levels throughout the British Isles. Were both Alf Keim and Mike Sachs simply witnesses to a routine military manoeuvre?
We get many aircraft flying over the valley, all different shapes and sizes. Air cargo, passenger, military. This was totally unlike anything I've ever seen in my life. I can only conclude, and I don't say this lightly, it is extraterrestrial.
We can never rule out military technology, but I think in this case it looks as if something genuinely unidentified was present in the Pennines that night.
Whatever the source of the strange lights seen over Lancashire, PC Alan Godfrey's experience continued to fascinate the UFO community. After Alan Godfrey's sighting in Todmorden, he claimed to have lost some 30 minutes in time. The only physical evidence of his encounter, a damaged boot and a sketch he'd made at the time. In an attempt to find out more, UFO investigators suggested a radical idea.
They contacted me and asked me, would I be willing to go under hypnotic regression? I declined straight away. I wasn't sure, you know. I thought, what is hypnotic regression? The only hypnosis I'd ever seen was on television, on a stage, you know, where they make fun of you.
Eventually, Alan Godfrey was persuaded to undergo hypnosis, which was conducted by two psychiatrists, Dr. Jaffe and Professor Blair.
They wouldn't tell either of the psychiatrists what the subject matter was. They would only tell them that it was a policeman who they were going to try to regress to a certain time on a certain date to an incident that may or may not have happened.
Mike Sachs, whose interest in UFOs had been sparked by his own experiences the previous year, was present at the sessions.
The atmosphere in the room was absolutely electric as Alan is relating this series of events. All of a sudden, and under hypnosis, he goes and covers his eyes. Then somehow he's floating and he's taken into this room.
I have no recollection whatsoever what went on during that hypnotic regression.
Under hypnosis, Alan Godfrey's claims grew more bizarre. Not only had he witnessed a UFO, he'd also come into contact with alien beings. In UFO terminology, he had been abducted.
We were actually present, possibly one of the first abduction cases that has happened in the UK.
Whatever Alan Godfrey had experienced in November 1980, and whatever had happened to the missing 30 minutes, the latest revelations seem scarcely credible.
UFO abductions, very big in America, not so big in Britain. A handful of people allegedly being abducted by UFOs. So when you get a policeman seeing a UFO, later coming out under hypnosis with the story he was abducted, you've got something that's quite solid there, and people have latched onto it as being, you know, a real event.
I'm asking myself, did that really happen? No, I couldn't have done. I don't believe it. But why am I saying it?
Psychologist Chris French has conducted several studies in the area of so-called paranormal experiences.
There are a number of different factors which seem to play a role in people reporting that they've had an alien abduction experience. Very often there is some initial triggering event, like, say, an episode of sleep paralysis or missing time, that leads people to believe they may have been abducted by aliens. What's probably happening is that they are getting confused between things that are happening in here and things that are happening in external reality. And basically, as a result, they're having sometimes hallucinatory experiences, sometimes false memories, but that's leading them to believe that they've had these alien encounters.
But it wasn't just Alan Godfrey's supposed abduction that intrigued ufologists. The investigators also discovered a connection to another unsolved local mystery, one they believed could have extraterrestrial origins. 6 months before his UFO sighting, Alan Godfrey and colleague Malcolm Agley had received a call about a body found at a local coal yard.
He received a radio message that found a body at Tomerton railway station, so I attended with PC Alan Godfrey.
Well, someone instinctively tells you there's something not right. You know, you come across dead bodies all the time, it sounds like, but you do. And it was lying on his back, just staring up into the sky.
There's no disturbance of the call, you know, to say how he got there. We just can't explain it at all.
And it was being treated as a crime scene. I think everybody at that stage thought it was a crime. That's how obvious it was. Why would a man climb a stack of coal, lie down on his back on top and die?
The body was that of a Polish émigré named Zygmunt Adamski, a former miner who'd moved to the UK after the Second World War and had settled in Wakefield, 20 miles from where he was found.
To me, I don't think he'd died there. I think he'd been put there. It looked to me as if he had anyway.
The evidence was inconclusive.
You'd expect if somebody had been lying on the belly or climbed up the coal, it'd be covered in coal dust. It'd been raining, it'd stick to him like glue. There was no visual coal on him, on the front of him, anywhere. Either on his face or anything. And he had these black marks that transpired to be burn marks round the back of the head. And there was one at the nape of the neck here, like an open wound, like a blistering wound, and it had had an ointment applied to it.
We just thought it was strange, you know, that he had these injuries and this sort of green ointment, which looked nothing I've seen before at all, you know. It just seemed strange and a bit unnatural, really.
Zygmunt Adamski had gone missing after a shopping trip. There was no suggestion that he'd planned to disappear, and he was known as a loving family man with no obvious enemies. The autopsy confirmed that Adamski had died of a heart attack. Coroner James Turnbull was mystified, not least by the strange substance found on Adamski's burns.
We had the substance analysed,
and the toxicologists and the scientists couldn't come up with any answers to what it was. And we came up against a blank at every line of investigation. This was one of the most puzzling cases that I've come across in 25 years. If somebody proved to me that UFOs exist and that there was one around there at that time, and that in some way we could associate it with this case, then perhaps I might say I'd only raise half an eyebrow.
Whatever the truth behind Adamski's death, which remains unsolved, Alan Godfrey's association with it was to turn him into a UFO celebrity. In November 1980, PC Alan Godfrey had witnessed a mysterious object whilst on patrol in Todmorden.
If I'd have got out the car and thrown a brick at it, it would have gone clang. That's how real it was.
Alan Godfrey was also connected to a mysterious death, which remains unsolved after almost 30 years. Zygmunt Adamski had gone missing in June 1980. His body had been found 5 days later, lying on top of a coal heap in Todmorden. At the inquest, Coroner James Turnbull was mystified, recording an open verdict and even suggesting a link with UFOs.
I did nearly 27 years in the police, and it's the one thing that I've never really got to the bottom of, and it is bizarre, and it's always been there at the back of my mind. There's just no explanation for it at all.
Nobody has ever been charged in relation to the death of Zygmunt Adamski, and the strange ointment which covered his burns has never been identified.
To this day, we don't know whether or not there actually is any connection with the Adamski death. The case is still unsolved. They've never found out how his body got onto the top of that coal heap.
Some UFO researchers looked at all the pieces of the puzzle. You know, the fact that he was put on a coal tip, and how did he get there? It's mysterious. And they just jumped to the most massive of conclusions that, you know, the only explanation must be that he's been abducted by aliens and something's gone wrong.
The Adamski story was picked up by Sunday Mirror journalist John Sheard. Although more used to covering Northern Ireland and the trial of the Yorkshire Ripper, he recognised the opportunity for an exclusive.
I sat down and tried to write it as straight as I could. I didn't want it to sound over-sensational, because it was already a very sensational story. What I didn't know was that when it hit the streets that Sunday, as the front page lead, was the incredible reaction that would happen. I'm talking about literally thousands of letters, hundreds of phone calls. I began to realise that this was a story that, even though I was still a bit iffy about it, had gripped millions of people throughout the world.
John Sheard soon discovered PC Alan Godfrey's involvement with the Adamski case, and the later claims made under hypnosis that he'd been the subject of an alien abduction.
I've been a journalist for 50 years and covered quite a few rather strange stories, but the Alan Godfrey story is undoubtedly the most astonishing thing I ever covered. What made Alan's story so special from my point of view was the fact that A, he was a serving policeman, and one expects them to be fairly straightforward in recording facts. And of course it came on the heels of the Adamski story and a very strange inquest. Individually, they were good pieces, but when you add the two together and a possible connection, you've got dynamite.
At the time, Alan Godfrey's story captured the public imagination. Whatever the truth behind it, it's become one of Britain's classic UFO cases.
I've got no doubt that Alan's UFO experience was to him real. Whether it was objectively real is a different kettle of fish altogether. We can all have experiences which we believe are real to us, and they can happen some form of lucid dreaming, for instance, hallucinatory states, fugue states, trance states. They're all real to the person, but that's a subjective reality, not an objective reality.
On the moors above Halifax, former police officer John Porter is meeting Alan Godfrey. Both reported seeing something unexplained on the night of the 28th of November 1980.
are you?
I'm all right, yeah. You're getting grey.
Hey, you still got yours, haven't you?
Yeah, I know, but it's stuck on.
Yeah.
It was only when I found out about you lads
Yeah.
that it made me feel a lot more comfortable.
Yeah.
You know, because...
I can understand that.
Do you know what I'm on about?
3 of us can't be wrong.
3 of you can't be wrong.
3 of us cannot be wrong. 3 of us saw what we saw.
Exactly. Now, I was on my own.
Yeah.
And I've been told I would hallucinate.
Yeah,
I've been,
much again,
you know, whatever.
I've had all this.
And another one. I was told I'd fallen asleep at the wheel.
Absolutely.
And I'm driving, but you know what I mean. I'm driving.
I know.
I mean, I'd only left the police station 5 minutes earlier. You know.
Alan has never changed his story. He's a very down-to-earth gentleman, and he had more to lose than to gain by relating such an incident. And that's why Alan's story goes down as a classic close encounter from the UK.
The Pennines continue to be fertile ground for strange phenomena. The numbers of reported UFO sightings are nowhere near those of the late 1970s and 80s, but they do still happen.
If you look at the number of sightings that have been reported over the years, you know, we appear to be absolutely swamped with aliens. You know, that the whole planet must be swarming with their ships as they're racing across the universe to visit us. It simply does not add up.
I have not come across a UFO that cannot be explained when you go through the various things that it possibly could be. If you know the sky, you can understand what you're seeing.
But for many who experienced their own close encounter, the passing of time hasn't diminished the impact.
I have to say, after this experience, in all honesty, I believe there's something out there other than us.
Every night at work I'm looking up, and I've never seen anything since, but you know, it is there. There's no doubt about it.
Where they come from, why they're here, I wouldn't know, but they are here.
Alan Godfrey left the police force in 1985. Almost 30 years on, he's still sticking to his story.
It's 28 years ago, and I still believe in what I saw was really there.
They've brains that work like human computers. Their description, not mine. Meet Flo and Kay next here on 5, identical twins who are also artistic savants and extraordinary people, the Rain Man twins.